Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. Today is one of those days that makes me very happy when we can welcome back an author that we've had on several times before. His name, Colson Whitehead. The book today is called Sag Harbor, and as usual, I guess, is published by Doubleday?
Yeah, all 5 books out with Doubleday. Very glad that they've stayed with me.
4 of those 5 books are novels, beginning with The Intuitionist, which we did together. John Henry Days, we did that. I'm not sure about Apex Hides the Hurt. I think
maybe I was,
I think we missed that. I think you toured in Europe for
that. Tokyo. I was big in Tokyo.
I always think of you as a very fearless kind of writer. You write about things that most people wouldn't think worthy of writing about. The Intuitionist is about a woman who solves the problems of maintenance on elevators through intuition.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to do the sort of cliched things when I started out. One cliche is the autobiographical first novel. Another cliche of the 90s was like the kind of Gen X novel.
Yeah.
Where were you when Kurt Cobain died? So I didn't want to do that. And while I did want to talk about the city, certain things like the city and race and technology, I had to find an oddball way to do it so I could convince myself I was being original. So elevator inspectors.
Yeah. And then you moved on to a magnificent historical figure, and I think got into him in ways that nobody else ever has, and I don't think ever will. The book is called John Henry Days. Yeah,
I think one of the sad things about doing what I do is that I just think on one simple thing over and over again. So sometimes it's elevators, sometimes it's John Henry. The good thing about John Henry is that he doesn't come up very often, but I am often in elevators with people, and people are like, "Oh, it's just like your book, huh?" I was like, "Yeah, I haven't heard that. Yeah, I haven't heard that recently."
And then the book that I'm not familiar with, at least I can't remember it. Apex Hides the Hurt.
That was about a corporate namer who.
Oh yeah, okay.
Comes up with names of products like Nike Swoosh, Prozac, and he gets hired to name a town in the Midwest.
Yes.
And hijinks ensue.
Well, so finally, now that you've written 3 novels in your very independent way, you've decided to do, as your 4th novel, the autobiographical / and this is a phrase I hate, coming-of-age novel.
Yeah, I mean, there's something so excruciating about the genre that it seemed maybe I should try it and see if I can do it. And it took, 20 years to get away from my adolescence for me to have enough perspective and distance to sort of shape that material into something. And the town of Sag Harbor is such a it's not really in the popular consciousness, so it seemed like I had a subject that I could own.
That was a little bit off the beaten track.
Yeah, no one had written about it, and so while I was dealing with adolescence, I was approaching it in a sort of sideways way by using Sag Harbor.
Now, Sag Harbor, autobiographically, is a place familiar to you because you said in an interview with, I guess, Publishers Weekly, that your family was always renters, and that the only real house that they had was the house in Sag Harbor, which, of course, they went to only in the summertime.
Yeah, I grew up in the city, and, I have a bunch of siblings, and if someone was born, we got a bigger apartment. Someone went to college, a smaller apartment. So we're always moving around, but Sag Harbor was the constant. And if you don't know what it is, it's part of the Hamptons, like Southampton and East Hampton, but it's sort of off the beaten track and wasn't as sort of valued in terms of land in the 20s and 30s.
I have a terrible question.
Sure.
Do the people in the Hamptons consider Sag Harbor part of the Hamptons?
They do now. I mean, there's been sort of like a pincer movement. So in the moment I'm talking about in '85 is when it was just turning over. So there's a club, and they're starting to get celebrities come and visit there. And now it's completely Hamptonsized, and you can't go down Main Street on the weekends because there's too many people.
One of the important, I think, shaping forces in Benji or Ben Cooper's formation is where he goes to school. Is that something that you did? Did you go to an almost all white kind of prep school?
Yeah, I was one of like five black kids in my grade in high school, and Benji also is one of the few black kids in his high school, and in the summer he has to play catch up with his black peers who he's grown up with, but he's kind of a dork, and so he's not really up on all the dances and the slang and how you're supposed to dress and behave. So Sag Harbor becomes a kind of black boot camp where he catches up on how he's supposed to be.
Well, I think we've had enough background stuff on Sag Harbor, and I think it's time now to meet Benji and some of his friends. We'll do that as soon as we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
The title of today's book is Sag Harbor. It's a novel by one of my favorite novelists, Colson Whitehead, published by Doubleday, and a gentleman by the name of Gary Steingart, who's the author of Absurdistan. I remember that. Yeah. And the Russian Debutante's Handbook. Yeah, two very, well-selling books, I guess.
I think so. And also, well written and.
Well, here's what he has to say about you. I mean, the hell with his books. Let's get to the important one. Pure, shimmering brilliance. Colson Whitehead's affecting new novel joyously lights up a place, a time, a family, and one unforgettable young man. It is also one of the funniest books I have ever read, a book loaded with the kind of humor that can only soar off from a heartbreaking sadness. He's got it right there. That is where somehow the humor comes from, at least some of the sadness.
Well, he's a teenager and he's a human being, and so he's roaming, he's patrolling the extremes of human existence. I think I didn't want to do the traditional coming of age thing where they get chased by the KKK or they find a dead body in the woods or whatever. So the moments I'm narrating are very quotidian. First minimum wage job, trying to figure out if you're wearing the right sneakers, and then trying to elevate these to being semi-compelling.
Yeah, one of the aspects of the relationship of the boys in Sag Harbor that leads to an almost tragic situation. Somewhere you say they've always fought. They've always had competitions, fiery competitions, and they were always for real. And so it makes sense that at some point they would do something totally wacko, like shooting at each other with various forms of BB guns.
Yes, they have the chapter 4 is the BB gun war, and part of what's going on with these kids is that they're well off and African American, and so they've experienced various head trips, questioning their own authenticity. Like, how can they be black and go to white schools or have white influences? How do they, deal with this sort of seeming paradox? And one of the things they do when they become teenagers is start to act out a little bit, and try to fall in line with their idea of what guys from the street really do. And it's play acting, but then in some cases it becomes real, as they become older. Yeah. If you don't outgrow this kind of confusion, it can lead to, it's a real tragedy and not just a near miss.
And I think like all teenagers, and I think you say it several times in the book through the characters, they're fighting against boredom. They don't want to be bored. Well, let's do something.
Well, that's summer. How do you make these lazy days meaningful?
Yeah.
And sometimes you're going to find the right way, and sometimes you're going to find the wrong way.
Thinking about Benji, I find him extremely likable, and yet very difficult to sum up. We meet him in the summer of 1985 when he's 15 years old, and likable, but he's also full of what I would call different kinds of anxiousness. Not so much anxiety, but he's anxious about many things, and he's very uncertain of who he is, which I think is natural for 15. Can you add anything to that?
Well, he's a very tentative self. I mean, he's discovering that his junior high self, elementary school self, doesn't fly in high school. You can't go around talking about Fangoria and George Romero and expect that people are going to take you seriously.
Yeah, and not so much D&D anymore.
Dungeons and Dragons. You got to stop talking about Dungeons and Dragons. And so he is trying to figure out the teenage codes, and sometimes it's the black code of what the new slang is, and sometimes it's the universal teenage dilemma of just how do you work as an individual in a sort of larger community. Yeah,
and how do you develop your individuality and yet still be accepted by the people who are important to you?
Yeah, and you pick and choose yourself by degrees, and that's the sort of slow process. I'm trying to narrate over the course of the summer. We don't, most people don't have huge coming of age, transcendent moments in our lives. We just sort of plod along, making mistakes, and at the end of by Labor Day, we're 0.001% smarter. And so that's, sort of Benji's summer. How does he become that one tiny increment smarter that he's grown a bit?
You're 0.1% smarter if you're lucky.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
No, and that's the in a way both the charm and the essence of the book. It's not we'll go to this big moment and then boom, 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 and that's the way many of these novels are put together. And I think you get us to kind of get into that summer life.
Well, I want to be true to that experience, the summer experience, and how we actually grow as people.
Though much of what goes on at Sag Harbor is the same over the years, there are some subtle changes. I want to check those out when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It's Conversations on the Coast, Sag Harbor, a novel by the wonderful Colson Whitehead is the book today. It's published by Doubleday. The Kirkus Review Service says, among other things, another surprise from an author who never writes the same novel twice. His warmest novel to date, and funniest as well. I think that's true.
All right, I'll take it.
Take it to the bank. Take it wherever you want. Much has changed in Sag Harbor over the years, but there's an incident. It's a minor one. Everyone still talks about Mr. Martin's 50th birthday party, when he hired Gladys Knight and one pip. They could only afford one pip. After all, the food and liquor was paid for, I guess. In the early days of Sag Harbor, and this is the change part, you would go around and you'd see lights on at somebody's property. You'd walk up, push on the screen door, whether you knew the folks or not, and walked in. And as soon as you were in and seen, you were among blood brothers. That's the way it was.
That's the 40s and 50s, my sort of grandparents' generation. They were professionals, part of this new emergent black middle class from Brooklyn, Manhattan, and New Jersey. And they discovered Sag Harbor and this unclaimed plot of land, and the community grew. And you didn't necessarily know everybody by name, but you recognized their faces, and you recognized that you'd all gone through the same thing. You had sort of carved out a space in the white man's world and had something to show for it, a place to go in the summer, a good business, and a better life you're trying to make for your kids. So you were blood brothers.
What a wonderful time. I mean, in my opinion, I guess I'm showing my age, but what a wonderful time. You rap on the door and just walk right in.
Sure.
You're part of the party. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
As opposed to, the 80s where Benji's hanging out, where that's not so much prevalent. And definitely now the neighborhood has changed a lot. The neighborhoods I talk about aren't all African American. They become more integrated. Just because the land is valuable, so people want to get in there.
Well, it's getting to the point where we can talk about Sag Harbor and the Hamptons in the same breath.
Yes.
That's about where we're going. One of the funniest moments in the novel for me was the kind of like a side trip you took to share with us the story of the end of Coca-Cola.
Oh, that was very good. I picked 85 for a few reasons. I picked it for some of the singles, the rap singles I wanted to talk about. I thought, I use pop culture a lot to talk about these sort of larger dilemmas of the kids. And I was thinking, what else happened in 85? This or that, Iran-Contra? No. And then I was like, New Coke, was that year? And luckily,
it was.
The cancellation of Classic Coke and the introduction of New Coke fell upon spring and summer of 85. So that becomes a sort of a caper that Benji has, trying to steal. He's a Coke addict, and he tries to steal.
A Coca-Cola addict, folks.
Yes, he tries to steal a 6-pack from somebody's house.
At a party.
In
the middle of a party, and he doesn't do it well.
Like many things he attempts, it doesn't necessarily come off the way he hoped.
And it falls to the floor, a wood floor, of course, making all kinds of noise. And there's this wonderful phrase you have. The 6-pack falls to the floor, quote, in the slow motion that is the speed of humiliation.
That's the way it goes.
What a picture.
I think we've all been there. So.
I love that.
So.
Oh, good Lord. I guess we should talk a little bit. No, we've talked enough about the BB gun war. Let's talk about what it's like to work in that ice cream store.
We know some people, you got to write what you know. So Norman Mailer is drawing upon his experience as a GI in World War II to animate Naked and the Dead. And I have my 3 summers in the ice cream store to animate.
3 you did?
3 summers, and now I hate ice cream. I would just, I would get up, put my dirty T-shirt on, big Olaf T-shirt, and I would eat ice cream all day. And by the end of the shift, I had a stomach ache. And next day, I would start over again. And so I abhor ice cream. I can't stand it. Because I have so much.
Do you think Benji, the night of the blackout that you talk about, now, do you think he left that freezer door open because he was developing a hatred for ice cream?
Well, I don't spell it out, so it's up to
I know you don't.
So it's up to the reader to.
I think that's what it is.
Unpack his.
The
his
hatred
action.
is starting to surface, and hey, Colin Whitehead writes. Colson Whitehead. You can be called that. Colson Whitehead writes some of the best fiction in America today, and Sag Harbor is just one more example. You better buy it. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.